Greetings, this is Teleologic Jones. I'm beginning a new teaching series here that is going to have probably fairly humble beginnings, but has a pretty big goal, and that is to work through the presentation of how we can know what we can know in cosmology step by step from very beginning steps. And I'll be taking the time to explain my hypothesis of, or theory perhaps, of Earth intention, and that it begins, we want to kind of put ourselves into a state of, I wouldn't say ignorance, but a state of childlike naivety when we're looking initially at these things. I mean, we start here with this image, and it's a circle, a simple circle representing the Earth. And we know that the Earth is a sphere. We've accepted this because of demonstration. We've flown over it, perhaps areas of it. We accept this spherical state of the Earth. Most people do. Somewhat on the experience, mostly just on that we've been told that's the case. And we accept that it is formed in this way because all objects on its surface or near its surface seem to be directed downwards from our perspective, and thus inward. And this is what gives the Earth its, if not absolutely pristine, it's nearly pristine circular and spherical state. But this is, a level of conception that is above and beyond. We want to step back a little bit even further from this. We will get here, and we can say that we already know we're going to get here, but let's see how we get here. What are the steps that can get us to this level of conception, which is a very high level of conception, actually, both for ourselves conceiving it, but actually for the formation of the ball itself, or the sphere itself. It is there is a conceptual state here that shall become more apparent as we continue. So we notice in our everyday life on Earth that objects vary in size and density, but they vary in weight. We can sometimes pick up objects, sometimes two people can pick up an object, sometimes there's objects that 100 people couldn't pick up together. There are various weights based on the quantity of mass in each object, and here we see three different objects with three different masses, and each having its own weight. And that's something we notice on Earth in terms of our one of two first things we notice. We also notice, as we will be looking at soon, that things fall. And fall and weight seem to be closely related, if not inseparably so, because of this very notion of something is causing objects to move in this direction downwards from our local perspective on an Earth that appears visibly to us to be flat because of its immense size as a sphere, of course, but we're talking here about our local experience. In our local experience, we have various objects, each weighing something that we can determine quite reasonably to be the case, why one thing is heavy and one thing isn't. If we pick up something thinking it's made out of metal, but it's actually made out of wood, we'll sometimes be startled because it won't weigh anything like what we expect it to. Same as if we pick up something we think is made out of wood and it's actually made out of iron, we will likewise be startled at the sudden great weight of the object. But through experience, we understand that objects are like this, that material content makes a difference to weight, but that all objects have weight, and that it's reasonably scaled. If all of these were objects of the same material and the same mass density, well, then we would have a reasonable scaling down here. Exactly what that scaling would be, we'd have to do some volume calculations, but it would be something like 8 and 5 and 3. Possibly not quite that good, but 8, 5, no, 2. Let's say 9, 5, and 2. That's my final guess. But anyway, we would have a volume variation of this material, and we would be able to scale it across, and we'd even be able to take an unknown quantity and put it on a scale and say how big this is, because it's going to, if we knew what this one was and this one was, but we didn't know what this one was in terms of its diameter, we could either measure it physically or we could measure its mass quantity and then understand exactly what size it should be compared to the scale in which these are relative to each other. If this indeed is 9 and 5 and 2, then that would be that's a consistency that we understand across objects of Earth, that material objects are consistent in their being, that they have weight according to mass density, and we can know that to greater detail right down to the atomic level, as I said, with atomic weight. But we also know it just simply by our own experience, that certain kinds of things are heavier than other kinds of things. But so far we have no number attached to this. We have these abstract notions that are sometimes indicative of numbers. And so what we don't know is what is the cause of this motion. It's universal in a sense, so far that we understand it. It's universal because it happens to all things of Earth. There seems to be no exemptions to, visible exemptions to this intention that directs all things downwards or inwards from the global view. So all things are driven. But what is the energy of this force? First of all, we don't see the force, so we're a fair distance from understanding what that force is. But we see that it has a universal kind of energy, or it has a kind of energy about it that we begin to see, and that it pushes all things. How, though? At their own weight, as it were. And this brings up an interesting question, like what is the cause of the weight of an object? Is it its mass? It seems to correlate so identically with its mass that it's tempting to say that it is its mass that is its cause. And yet, if we do just a simple thought presentation, we can understand that the mass cannot be the cause of the weight of the objects of Earth. So we resume looking at a comparison between a lateral force on a ball or on a mass object, pushing it up against a vertical scale such that we get a weight of that force similar to what we have with the weight of the intention. And we've gone ahead and named this now, not by knowing what it is in itself, but by what we know that it does. It is that common intention that moves all objects of Earth toward the center of Earth, or downwards in a local context, as we are discussing here. So this common, it is the whatever its cause, whatever its the affect behind it, it is the cause for the very space that we live in. Oh, sorry, let me rephrase that. The very place that we live in Otherwise, we would just live in open space. Our place, our location of Earth, and the many locations on its surface are all defined by this common effort upon all objects. And this will also give us an opportunity to see our first look at the distinction between this intention here as a force. We will say that it is a force in that it moves things, or things are moved. Therefore, we assume there is a force, even if we can't see it. This sort of terrestrial force. Because with this force, we know two things. One is that objects have weight, as we're seeing in this case, but also that they fall, and that it's always because there is this continuous intention, this continuous energetic intention upon them, which is implied not by seeing that energy, but by seeing these conditions of objects, weight, and later we'll look at fall. And there is no sense that there's an energy bumping up against here. It's just so almost like a trance. The objects fall towards the center without any recognition, even that a force is acting upon it. It almost seems as if it's a part of the nature of the objects themselves, that it's just their nature to move downward or towards the center of the earth. And yet, for that to be the nature of each and every individual object of earth, as an independent decision, is an impossible idea to think of outside of some divine conception. There is no idea that the matter itself makes the choice based on what? We see that it's a universal thing applied to all things, but in this very reasonable way, sure. It's related to, weight is related to mass, sensibly so. But if we look here now, we can see that mass cannot be the cause of weight, but rather the force acting upon is the cause of weight. And what is the force that's acting upon any given mass object? An intention basically equal to its weight. For out here, let's say we have our terrestrial force and we're pushing upon the ball. This now, whatever we think of a force out here, is not connected integrally to the object, but in some way, if there's a whirligig on it out here, it always has the capacity of losing direction. There's a break in the line here. The force is not through. The force is against. And also there's a way of losing connection in terms of the force's action. If the wall were to fall, if the weight measuring device were gone, and this were pushing, they may separate at some point. It's a special condition for this force to remain attached to the ball. But in the case of the intention that forms the earth, it's essentially a part of the relationship is that they are inseparable. The motion of objects toward the center of earth is inseparable from the earth itself and inseparable from the objects themselves. It is an applied nature to them, because we know it's not their nature as objects to do so. We don't, at least it doesn't make sense to us necessarily that every rock would necessarily need to want to move. We can imagine a rock floating in free space or in some other condition. So we have this transfer we have a force through some greater or less efficiency transferring a force to a mass object, pushing it laterally up against a scale, and then it weighs something. Well, what does it weigh? Does it weigh its mass? Or does it weigh the force upon it? In fact, with some variations due to resistance being on Earth, but in free space, in absolute free space, if no matter what the mass is here, the weight is going to be equal to the force upon it. And we see if we have a mass that has equal to 10, we give it a quantity of 10, and this is in a sense arbitrary, but also whatever scaling we give to mass, we will then be able to scale that across all objects of mass. What we call 10 pounds could have been called 5 pounds if the scaling was twice the size, each unit was twice the size. And then we would have just scale everything differently. We would no longer think that 100 pounds it would be 50 pounds that would be a lot of weight, and so forth. There is an absolute nature to matter, in that it's consistent in its makeup and in its weight and in its mass presence, I should say first, and consistent in its weight. But its weight is by something outside of itself, and that is by the intention that's pushing down on it. So an object with a mass of 10 will have a weight of 10, according to the scale. Once we've set a scale, that will be something that we can do. These will be the scale is subjective, but the scalability is absolute, and that is very important to understand. If this weighed 100, then the weight would be 100, because the intention would still, the intention always pushes down at the weight of the object. It's not the object itself moving, but these individual relationships or communal relationship with all objects. And then we have we have this force coming this way, which is our terrestrial force, which is a lateral force, and we're giving it also an intention of 10. Now we know that there's a break here, and there actually should be an efficiency loss, such that if this is putting out an effort of 10, this is only receiving a weight of 9 in some portion, or 8 or 6 or 5, depending on the loss of efficiency here. But we're assuming high efficiency, such that 10 here is pushing on the ball, and that's what's causing 10 over here, and that is neutral to the fact that this is 10, because we can quite simply change it to 20. If our intention here is 20, this will be 20, because the force is that which is pushing upon. It's this exterior force. The ball is neutral to that force in terms of its affect. It's not neutral to its being caused to move. It's participating in that in a way, but it is not the cause of its motion. There's an external prompt causing the motion here, which is then pushing here and causing this weight. If you had a whole bunch of these things stacked up and you were pushing on them actually on Earth, you would have quite a loss of the lateral force or the terrestrial force to the weight at the other end. And so there is always going to be some efficiency loss due to resting here. But in free space, and with a perfect connection, you would have whatever this force is would be equal to this force. So we see that we can make the equivalency between the force, this terrestrial force, its value, and the weight. of that force in a assumed pure efficient transfer. Can we then say that Earth intention, that its force, I mean, we don't call it Earth force for a reason because it doesn't behave like a force, not like a terrestrial force. It behaves more just like a suggestion that must be obeyed rather than as a force in this terrestrial sense. We see no bumping against. We see, as we said before, the smooth, continuous relationship in all phases of any object, whether they be in a weight state or whether they be falling. And we'll need to get to fall here in a minute to answer this question a little more pointedly. But can we say, though, that Earth intention, as a such as it is a force, can we say that Earth intention is equal to the weight intention? Well, for each individual object, there's a sense in which that must be true, as we said when we saw the three objects lined up before. They are each affected by the Earth intention. Individually, it seems to us, like we look at every individual object around us and we see that each one is held to the surface that it's on, or held to the ground, or such, independent of the other ones, and yet in total unison with all the other ones too. It's why I say that this intention, this thing that we don't yet fully understand, and yet we understand its actions so far, is that all objects have weight, and that weight is reasonably distributed by mass. It is scalable across the plenum of all mass objects. And that for each object, as it were, this intention is acting with a customized intention equal to its weight, because we have learned through our discussion about the lateral motion that it isn't the mass but the force that creates the weight. And as force varies, weight varies. Here also we know that this must be the case. It's not the mass causing its weight. It's the effort upon it which we see. So in a big sense, yes, we can say that this effort is equal to the weight of an object, but it's the weight of all and every object of mass, such that the individual case is almost lost in whatever it is that's happening. And we now want to move on to fall in order to see another feature about this unity, which is not necessarily apparent when we're discussing weight only, but when we get to fall, we will have more information to enlighten us as to the nature of this intention, at least as much as we can understand. There's much about it that will remain mysterious, and this is according to all theory. Even the gravitational theory, after all of its hypothesizing and claiming to theorize, says it has no idea what gravity is. And it will remain mysterious in many ways, and yet it will also become clearer as to what its true nature is. The closer we keep ourselves to simple observations like this and not moving on to speculation. We want to stay away from any speculation, and I hope that's what is clear here, is that these are demonstration. This is somewhat what we would call the speculative knowledge in a way, but it's also known to us. We know this is true. We can test it. If it's not believed to be true, it can be tested. We know objects aren't naturally moving laterally, and if they're going to weigh something in a lateral motion, it will be equal to the force that's pushing upon them by whatever efficiency transferred to them. And so we know that the force, the terrestrial force, is equal to the weight force, the lateral forces. And we also know that Earth's intention is in some way equal to the weight of each individual object, but that because it's equal to all objects in that same way, that it implies that it's something much, much greater than a simple force like this, an individual force upon individual objects, but rather a broader conception that leads to the direction of objects toward the center of Earth, or simply downward in the case we are looking at here. So yes, we just really want to make it clear that what we're doing is talking about not things that are hypothetical yet, and when they are, we will be clear as to when those moments or parts of the discussion enter. But so far, we're looking at things that are based purely on observation, what we would call intuition, as their form of knowledge, and intuitional observation, but also based on induction, which is, we see, our knowledge is based is on intuition and also based on induction. We take various objects and we understand each one doing its thing one by one, and then this, having come to this realization that things are scalable across the variety of mass objects, we have this inductive knowledge about them. And so these are simple forms of knowledge that we have that are intuitive. They require no special technical learning, no, as it were, no, numbers-based scientific research, although we've had to do some amount of research if we've come to the real conclusion that they are scalable across. We have to be able to have been using some devices. So we've assumed some amount of invention in this case, but so far. But anyway, let's move forward to a consideration of what happens when objects are not being held and in a weight state, such as this object we see here, but actually are falling. What happens when the ground falls, when the bottom falls out? I get free incidental music on my recordings. So, we're looking here at the transition, or not, well, it is a transition usually from weight to fall. We have now understood that there is this intention that moves things towards the center of Earth or downward in our local perspective. And calling it this doesn't necessarily negate the gravitational theory at this point. It's just another way of naming it so that we can discuss it independent of that. I have another series which may or may not ever come to fruition, where I am analyzing Feynman's. I think it's Feynman's. Anyway, he was a physicist, a kind of a pop physicist theoretical physicist in the 1960s. And he begins his conversation about gravity with a formula. Well, This is why we're doing this here very much the opposite. We're starting with observation. Now, it may be that formula is based on perfectly fine observation, but when you're teaching how the formula came to be known, we should begin with the empirical beginning. And that's all. That's why we abstract this as saying it's just an intention. We actually don't know its nature really, other than that, as Aristotle said, and as Thomas Aquinas said, and as also I think all of the cosmological and ontological fathers said, that a nature, that an affect, that an effect bears in it somehow the nature of its affect. So if this effect, this falling, this change, which is an effect, bears within it somehow the nature of the thing causing it to happen. And that's so far what we're trying to see. What is the nature of this intention? And we saw in weight that the weight of an object, that all objects have their own weight based on their mass quantity. So these are all different weights, we're going to say. In this little presentation here, we're going to say each of these is a ball made up of the same stuff. It could be wood. It could be, it's a less consistent substance, so we'll say it's some kind of metal. And they are of the same type, but vary in size. Same type of matter, but vary in size. So their mass quantity varies. So in this state of pressure against a resistor, the Earth's surface or someone's hand or the top of a building or wherever the resistance is taking place to keep the object from following this natural course, which is to fall. Well, should we say that it's its natural course? We'll see if that makes sense. But it has an intention toward the center of the Earth or down, as we see it in front of us. But for that philosophical understanding of the nature of, we will look at the nature. We don't see anything moving objects. We just see objects moving. And normally in the world, when we see things moving, as we saw before, a mechanical force is somewhat clumsy against an object. It's not perfect like this. It has a kind of bumping into or a connection. You need to fasten it to it so that it will continue to do its thing. But even then, those forces will sometimes torque against the objects they're moving. That is some lack of perfection in the connection with the object, such as we have under the intention of Earth. We see that IE is unlike a material or a physical cause. I differentiate these two things. By material, I'm implying perhaps more a mechanical cause, a direct connection of some kind, even if that's some kind of whirligig pushing against the air, that's still a mechanical cause. Versus a physical cause, of which mechanical causes are a subset, but also physical causes, because there will be other principles that affect that aren't just merely even just bumping, but other physical principles will be involved. But also a physical cause like, say, a magnetic or electric or electromagnetic, I should say, a cause, or atomic kind of level causes, which are more energetic. But we're talking about gross matter all the time. In this case, at least so far, there's no reason to have gone below the surface in that way. So the physical cause would be more like magnetism. And I won't do that right here, but in the Earth's intention is neither like any kind of material mechanical force, a bumping, a pushing, an engine, some kind of energy, input or output, and then pushing against the thing in some kind of way, or that of itself it's got some kind of motor or some kind of thing that allows it to blast out and push. Any of those kinds of ways are we would call material or mechanical causes. Whereas magnetism is a relationship between objects of either both being magnetic or one being magnetic and the other having the property of being attracted to magnetic objects, that is, falling into their magnetic fields in some way. And that has been taken to be analogous to Earth's intention, and yet we will see in time that it is not analogous, and it is not analogous for these reasons, and they will just simply be stated now because it's trying to introduce concepts rather than labor them too much in their first mentioning. We see that it is unlike any material or physical cause because it is seamless. There's no point at which, from our perspective anyway, it begins. As high up as we can manage to go, we still feel a pull to the earth. So this, or a direction to the earth. Even words like pull and push are in many ways inappropriate to describe what weight is like and what fall is like. And we'll look at that in more detail here soon. But we have, it is also constant, relentless, it never ends, and constant also in its value, and it's continuous in that it never ends. So it's constant in its impulse. The weight of the object remains the same always. And as we saw here, the weight of the object is equal to the effort upon the object by the intention, because that was the same thing we saw here. And yet this is, as far as we know, perfect, whereas this is bound to mechanical fluctuations. This also can be, in fall, bound to some mechanical fluctuations because, or buffeted by the wind, or there will be resistance. So we see that the Earth's intention does not just make all things move through time and space without regard for the presence of other objects. In fact, that's why the Earth, as far as we can tell, collects, because the objects are all moving toward the center, and therefore there's a collection as everything's moving in. If this is the Earth, as everything's moving in towards the center, or as we had already illustrated, as everything is moving towards the center, we see how that is the structure of the sphere, because only because it is all directed to the center does it hold itself in its form. And that is, St. Basil, actually, in the Hexameron, mentions this. I can't remember the homily, which of the homilies offhand that is, but he talks about this basic notion of all things falling in, and this because things are all, the pressure and the motion is equal, you don't have it sort of splaying out. It's directed, but he doesn't answer in any way why it's directed, or even who's directing it or how. But I think he implies God is directing it, but I don't think he makes that clear statement. Anyway, this is the nature. We've now stepped out from the local view to the global view, or the spherical view, and it's perfectly reasonable to understand why the Earth has the shape that it has, if all things are directed in this way. But why are they directed in this way? in order for it to have the shape, I mean, that becomes the telos then, which is something quite forbidden in contemporary society or contemporary academia. So it is constant. It is the same intention on all things, moving, impelling them in a way, moving only when the opportunity, but always impelling, and that it is continuous. It never ends. It's relentless, and so it is unlike any material force that we know in its nature. And so we see back here, we were talking about weight and fall, and how this just indicates the bottom falling out, as it were, this faint line. So everything, all of these objects were held, and that at a given time, at the same time, they were all let go, and they all fall the same distance in the same time. Over that time period, the ones over here that were just still resting in weight up against the structure that keeps them from passing through as these ones fell, they just carried their weight. So weight occurs over time too. Weight is constant over time because the intention is constant, and the intention is equal proportionally to the weight of each object, to the mass quantity, of each object, and therefore creating a weight that is proportional to its mass quantity. Over here, though, what happens when the bottom falls out? Well, everything moves, all the objects move at the same velocity, as it were, not as it were, that move at the same velocity. All of the objects fall at the same speed. So, and yet there's a unity between these things that we can find right away, because if every object is being moved with a weight equal to its mass, or in some way, if every object is being moved with an intention that is proportional to its mass quantity, in other words, it makes for a reasonable weight based on the quantity of mass that's in that object, and that each and every object, somehow, even when they combine together, when they stick together, when they cohere or break apart, like if you throw a dirt clod in the air and it breaks apart somehow, it will all continue flying through the air at the same, it will all descend. Every part of it will descend at the same velocity as if it stayed together. So it's a continuous effort that leads all things to fall at the same rate. But because each and every morsel, as it were, is moved at a rate or impelled at a rate that is proportional to its mass quantity, they all move at the same rate then. This is the reason for objects all falling at the same rate. They're all moved at the same rate because it is a condition of the Earth's intention acting upon them such that they each possess their own weight, meaning proportionally they are all being moved by this intention that causes this weight. They are all being moved at a rate that gives them their weight according to their mass, and therefore logically, if that effort is upon them, it would take, scale-wise, these different efforts, these as it were, for now we're going to say hypothetically custom efforts upon each one to move them the same distance across the plenum. Now, I think that is an improper way of looking at it. It's just a way of illustrating it now, but I think that is very much too mechanical a way of seeing it, to see that each object somehow has a custom force acting upon it. It's not that's a human way of conceiving what's happening, a far too human way of conceiving it. But we do see this very sensible relationship between weight and fall, which I think is very much lacking. I'm not in this series or in this teaching trying to spend too much time dealing with the details of the Newtonian gravitational law, which is neither Newtonian nor a law, but it is it has a confused relationship, shall we say, at least, between weight and fall, because it wants to describe the effort as an acceleration, meaning it wants to describe it as its fall, like the fall is the important thing, and it's a sensible intuition in that, look at this, I mean, even in weight we imply what is weight but withheld fall, and yet in the weight state we understand the energy. We have the moment that it's resting, such that we can quantify the energy and understand why it is that each and everything falls at the same rate. There's no way through this. So we see this unity between weight and fall in terms of the energy that is impelling them, compelling them, but in a very passive way. Or should I say, it's almost as if it's not moving them as mass quantities, but it's just simply moving them as objects, that all things move in this way, which we can describe as a certain kind of speed, a certain kind of velocity. And that velocity is, we'll see, actually an acceleration. So let's have a look at that real quick. Now, backing up to just being somebody standing on the earth, and we've done some very basic assessments. We've noticed that things have weight based on their size, but that also mitigated by or varied by the type of stuff they're made out of. Then we dropped some objects, and we found out that they all fall at the same rate, that such that a large object and a small object will hit the ground at the same time if dropped from the same height. And then maybe we've taken an object and we've tossed it in the air. And we can see in this illustration here, we know what that's like. We have a baseball in our hand, or whatever the object is, tennis ball, and we toss it up in the air. We notice that it goes up faster, or it starts off faster and slows down, and comes to like a point of rest, like a solstice. And then it comes back down, and then we notice it speeds up. So this is a very intuitional reading of the pattern of the ball, and we've seen this all our lives when we have done things with balls, tossed up a baseball to hit it with a bat. We know we're kind of timing it. Jugglers know this very well. And any kind of thing we've done, playing frisbee, football, all kinds of sports, incorporate this intuitional use of this capacity. A basketball player throws it at a given arc, such that it will travel and go up and then come down, and it goes through this solstice each time and comes back down. So we know then, by looking at all these different objects that we've tossed up in the air or in some way determined are speeding up as they fall, we know that all objects have a common acceleration, because we know that all objects have a common rate of fall, that they will always be at the same distance. Wind resistance excluded, we would have the same velocity of fall based purely on the effort of the intention. And so this weight effort, or the intention's action upon the ball, making it move down, which is in this case held as weight, when we're over here and it falls, what now is its momentum state? We can say that the momentum here is a weight momentum, in that it's a rest state, and yet it's a force state. I mean, if it's a heavy object and your foot's under it, it's not very fun. So it's a constant effort. So this effort then, that is acting constantly upon the object in weight, begins to express in fall. And we know the effort never varies. It's constant and consistent, as we have noted. And we don't see that there should be any difference in terms of its action, that the earth intention would suddenly transform from the weight state to the fall state. The only thing transforming is the expression of the location of the ball. It's not in any way, nothing has changed. It is by its weight effort, or what we measure here as weight, that it is falling. And so that never goes away, this weight. It's often said that an object doesn't have weight in fall. And this seems, it's a kind of okay shorthand, but it's not really a profound statement. It's not really saying anything truly physical about, or anything true about the kind of deep physics of this change, this relationship change. So we'll leave that to the side for now. Maybe we'll revive it. We'll see if it actually has legs in the end. But it's not quite right, I don't think, at this point to discuss things that way. Because where would it go? The energy that was causing weight is still present, and somehow it expresses in motion. Now, if the energy is actually fixed in time, that it's a single energy sitting there ready to be expressed out over time, and it will eventually run out, that it's only kind of relevant to in a moment. It has a constant state of an energy, but that energy acting would then be spent going this way. And that's, as we'll see when we get to the math, that's not how it works. It's not a stored up energy which then spends itself in the motion of the object. The energy actually remains constant throughout the fall of the object. Sorry, I'm illustrating over here when I should be over here. The energy falling is not spent, but is continuous. And that can be demonstrated mathematically. And we'll see how that works. And yet, it's not a constant velocity, it's an acceleration. And this is intuitively, I'll give the intuitional understanding of what's happening here. And then we'll, perhaps in the next video, I think maybe this will be the end of the unnumbered demonstrations. But these unnumbered demonstrations, I think, are very important because I think numbers, they're very important. Obviously, I've numbered these out. I'm not, but that's more just so that there isn't confusion in conception later, that these are the by time locations we should expect at time 1, time 2, and time 3 of these objects, and the motion is actually one unit to here, and then 3 more units to the 4th unit here, and then 5 more units to the 9th unit here. That's how the numbers work out, but that's the exponential increase. It's simply by the rate of the square of time. 1t is 1t is 1 squared, so that's 1. 2t is 2 squared, so that's 4. 3t is 3 squared, and that's 9. Now, to understand what's happening here under this motion, just intuitionally, why is it gaining in velocity when the effort upon it is continuous? Shouldn't it be moving at a constant velocity? And this would be a very strange state of affairs if it were the case, because the only way you can move it always at a constant velocity, one ball, would be to suddenly, like a pool ball being hit by another pool ball, to suddenly have velocity transferred to you. And so in this case, dropping things would be crazy. They would just drop something, and then it would just be barreling through the air, and everything would be much, much heavier because it would have a kind of an impulse weight constantly bearing on it, unless, of course, it turned off and on and changed. So it just doesn't work. It has to be. It's not connected to it in that way. It's compelling it. Maybe impelling is the better term. It is a suggestion that cannot be resisted. Is really a more poetic way of talking about how objects fall. But it's being compelled. But if it's a constant impulse, a constant energetic input that's over here in weight, and now it's over here being changed into motion, that means that as it moves, each instance, each time unit, it's been caused to move in the first instance by this motion, and now it has, as it were, 2 causes to its motion, which will continue with it through the fall. It will always have these 2 factors to its motion. And these factors are going to be its current velocity and the additional impulse of the earth intention on it, according to the energetic motion, proportional to its mass, moving it through space. So the weight intention remains with it. It's constant. It never goes away. It's constantly there, acting upon it, even when it moves. And this we know because if we hold an object in our hand of reasonable weight, we notice that if we drop it really from any height, it weighs more, as it were. It has greater momentum at impact than does its mere weight. We not only have its weight bearing down, but we have its weight and its motion. And this seems to be the case here. And this is not really indicative of a material cause. In fact, it's not indicative of a material cause. This is a conceptual state of motion, because we should expect the energy to be spent, or we should expect the energy to want to move it at a constant velocity if it's a consistent material motion. But it's neither of these things. It's a almost passive motion, but which cannot be resisted, that is compelling things in a direction that and they will achieve a given velocity pattern. To say that they have a fixed velocity is not correct, because the velocity is continuous. The increase of the velocity isn't continuous, but the rate of change is due to this continuous, the further motion by the weight intention each time. So objects in fall have whatever motion they have based on their fall initiation, or the time they've fallen. And we can imagine if the power were cut off, as it were, at some point, that the object is moving. It's going to continue moving at a constant velocity, then the constant velocity that it had achieved until the moment of the releasing of the force, if it could be turned off. And of course God could turn it off, so he's turned it on. So theoretically, turning it off will cause the object simply to continue at its rate, because it's not connected to, it's not like it's grabbed onto it. Earth intention hasn't grabbed the object and is carrying, it's running with it. It's acting upon it, but in a very passive way, allowing it to sort itself out in the environment, allowing water to settle and find its own level, allowing the soil to do the same thing over broader spans, allowing everything that we see in the sorted physical material world that we live in, is because this energy is passively actively intending things, but not compelling them absolutely where to go, and yet absolutely in the simplicity. If it gets bumped over this way, well, it just the intention's just still down. It's not, oh, gotta correct and go back to where it was. It's just still the same wherever it is. The intention is down like this, and it's constant and equal to the mass of each object. This is at least logically so, intuitively so. And so there's a motion due to this compulsion, and that then there is an increase in current velocity. But that current velocity, which is responsible for part of the motion, is actually responsible for an increasing amount of the motion, an increasing proportion of the motion, the current velocity. And we'll see in the next lessons how this, clarify this with a graphic method and with a more mathematical look. But this is, so far, I hope a reasonable introduction to the conception here of Earth intention. And we see this beautiful unity with this force that forms our Earth, about each object having its own weight. And because of this assumed energetic effort upon each weight, this compels all objects to move at the same speed, same velocity. Although we want to guard against seeing that as too literal of an explanation. It may necessarily become the case, but it seems to miss the grandeur of what's happening, and it seems to want to hold on to a materialist or a material explanation, and it is not a material explanation. What we will be seeing through this process is that, as we saw already, that this effort is not anything like any material caused force, and therefore by elimination, it must necessarily be a metaphysical cause, or be by metaphysical cause. We need a metaphysical affect for Earth's intention to understand how it is doing what it is doing. And when we get to this point, actually, in this discussion, and this gets us to a sticky point we have in our scientific society as Christian natural philosophers, or scientists if we prefer to call ourselves that, is that the license to vivisection that contemporary scientific society gives itself, that knowledge is so important that we must be able to mutilate anything and everything in order to learn, and that we sort of can just throw ourselves around in whatever situation and boldly go into places and claim we know things when we may be very ignorant yet of processes and our understanding. We should never be approaching this the way a secular scientist would. We should really not be working in the same institutions for the most part, because our approach to learning and gaining knowledge and our purpose behind it is so entirely different in the church, in the traditional church, not in the contemporary mess that we see, but in the traditional church, which is and will be returning. This is not what we do. I mean, I think if there's anything that this time that we're living through is doing, is proving what it means to be a Catholic, what it means to be Christian in the most traditional, long-standing apostolic sense, because everything has been brought into question, and a lot of this is hubris, and in knowledge this is also hubris, to claim that we must know how this works. We've got a material explanation, we know we've got it wrapped up, it's in our pocket, and all I can say so far is that this is perfectly reasonable, and yet at the same time utterly inexplicable. And yet doesn't mean that there isn't a way of understanding more clearly this relationship between weight and fall, in that weight remains as the energy remains, and fall, somehow motion occurs without cost to the energy of weight. That is not a normal, as I said, a normal physical state of things. And so we find ourselves very much at awe with this state of things, rather than ho-hum about it. And it speaks of as I said before, of a metaphysical affect, either which is earth intention or which is the cause of earth intention. Now, beyond the veil, and there is a veil here in that we see objects have weight, we see objects move, but we don't see anything moving them. There's an energy occurring that we can see its result. We can even see its telos back to the formation of the sphere. We can see its efficient cause, its formal cause, and its telos, all wrapped up into one, and the material cause also, all wrapped up into one cause, a unity. And this is, we talked about causes reflecting upon their effects. In other words, that an effect, we see that as we were saying before, that effects have some mark of their affect in them through the transfer of cause. And so we see here that the unity of this effort, the simplicity of this effort, is indicative of the unity of God, even in multiplicity, in his case in Trinity. The unity of God, also the simplicity, the utter simplicity of God, that even in this creative effort we see a perfect system. It's not an accidental material physical relationship that sort of randomly occurs based on the accumulation of mass, but it's actually a perfectly rational, perfectly, as I say, understandable, and yet inexplicable from a physical point of view, because the motion does not spend the weight continues. And we'll see mathematically how that's confirmed in the next considerations when we look at what is called the unit fall graph and the concept of the unit fall, and we will begin that next time. If you've listened this far, thank you very much. This is a lot, perhaps a little too wordy, perhaps not wordy enough. Anyway, let me know in the comment section what you think. Please share. Also like. I hope to see you next time. Next time, Tilly Logic Jones out.